This is where theology meets the real world. This is So What About Us? A podcast about tackling real-life problems through the lens of Scripture, learning how to apply God's Word to every single area of life. Because the Christian faith isn't just something we study, it's something we live. In this episode, Pastor Stephen, Ben, and Travis are joined by ruling elder Andy Nelson to discuss Jesus' encounter with a demoniac from Pastor Stephen's sermon on Mark 5, 1-20. They then further consider the passage from Andy's Sunday evening devotional on Daniel 4, 34-35. And now, let's ask the question, so what about us?
All right, welcome to another episode of So What About Us? This is episode 12, and we are joined, as always, by a faithful companion.
Yeah, I'm Travis.
I'm Ben.
And our guest, ruling elder,
Andy Nelson.
All right, Andy. So everybody probably knows you because of your wonderful, gregarious personality. But tell us about, so you work at Eagle Ranch. What do you do at Eagle Ranch?
Besides being wonderful and gregarious, I am the director of spiritual life and foster care.
What does that mean?
That means I care for the kids in our program and in the ministry as well as our staff. So I come alongside them in their spiritual formation. And then I oversee our foster care initiatives, which is an on-campus initiative and also some community work.
Excellent. Wonderful. I love Andy for many, many reasons, but one of them is that I think had Andy and I gone to high school together, we would have been great friends.
For sure.
We
There's
have
no doubt.
the same sense of humor that stems from locker room type humor where you make fun of each other.
That's
and,
right.
It's a relationship based on mocking each other, which are the best kind of relationships, I think.
I tend to agree, but
As Paul outlines that in Delayed John.
I'm friends with you even though we didn't go to high school together. So
I'm much older than Travis, and so we could not have gone to high school together. I don't know. High school Andy probably wouldn't have been on this podcast, though. So let's not, I don't know about that.
All right. Well, we've come through the storm in terms of the book of Mark, though community-wise, we are certainly in the midst of one. And so we trust the words of Jesus there. Jesus gets through the storm, and they get to the other side just as he has promised them, and just like he said they would. And he's come here for one reason, and it is to meet this demon-possessed man. So let me read this, and I don't want to work through this with you guys, because this is a complicated text. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. All right, so you have this man who is possessed by demons, and he's living in this Gentile territory. So Gerasenes would have been part of the Decapolis, which would have been these 10 cities that the Romans rebuilt and established. This is Gentile territory. And I think everything about this scene is meant to make you just feel a darkness. So you're going into Gentile territory. He's no longer with these big Jewish crowds. You're going to the tombs. So they would have buried their dead in these hillside caves, and then come back and collected the bones later. This is, they're farming pigs nearby. So this is not kosher. These are not clean animals. And so everything just feels like this is just the stronghold of pagan territory, the darkest place you could have possibly gone. And so Jesus leaves these big crowds that are listening to his teaching, apparently so attentively, and he goes for no other reason, because the first thing that he does when he's done with this man is get back in the boat and go to the other side. He goes for apparently no other reason than to minister to this one man. And I just have to pause and just think about the implications of that for how you think about ministry, how you think about being a pastor, and I'm using air quotes here, growing a church and doing ministry. You know, Jesus only ministered for 3 years on earth, and he spends some percentage that we would look at and think is crazy of his time going to minister to this one crazy man in Gentile territory. I'm just convicted by that. I'm curious what you guys think, and this may even be true of Eagle Ranch and the ministry that you guys do. I think my mind defaults so quickly to like investment kind of thinking. So what's the highest ROI? And ROI defined in like number of people reached or responses or size of something, you know. I don't know. What do you make of the fact that Jesus does this?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of questions about this passage. This is the first
We're going to
one,
get there.
right? I've got a whole list, so I was hoping you were going to give me all the answers. I mean, there is a sense in which you almost appreciate it and almost opens your eyes to what ministry, the purpose of ministry is not a crowd, right? And so while sometimes preaching and different things do draw a crowd, that's not the purpose of this. But you also do get, at the end of this, not to get into the story, but at the end of the story, he then goes to the Decapolis and he begins to tell people about Jesus. And so there is like, maybe Jesus had something in mind there. But the answer to your question is, I don't know. I don't know why I wouldn't trust like.
I do like that point, though, which is that Jesus' first commissioned preacher, I think, to the Gentiles here is a guy that was the craziest person among them, which is helpful as somebody called to preach.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we called the craziest among us to do our preaching as well.
I'm infinitely qualified based on this text.
Right.
What do you guys think? I mean, Travis, you know, you're ministering to youth. I think there's a real draw in youth ministry to think like, how do I get a bunch of cool kids to come and get this as big as possible?
Yeah. Well, they say like youth ministries kind of reflect the youth pastor. So I don't have a lot of cool kids in the youth. If you hear this in your youth, I think you're all cool. No, man, I think if you're a part of the crowd and you see Jesus ministering to a crazy person, you probably don't like it very much.
Yeah.
But if you're the crazy person, like this means everything to you.
Yeah.
That Jesus would do that. And so I think that's kind of what we have to wrap our heads around. You know, we have to see like, so everybody needs Jesus, but like the people that are outcast, neglected, those are the ones that Jesus seems to make the biggest attempt to reach.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's also the most uncomfortable.
Right. And to agree that he says, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done to me.
Yeah.
Not in Mark, but I mean, he goes on to say, like, if you don't visit the orphan, the widow, the person in jail, then you've not even hung out with me.
Yeah. You know, so as I was writing, I was thinking, this is the living embodiment of the mustard seed. What is the smallest, most unbelievable start to the kingdom that you could possibly have? It's I don't think I could have drawn up a crazier scenario than this. So Jesus is sort of saying, yeah, my kingdom doesn't work the way that you think it works, and I'm going to prove it to you. And here's an example of the smallest piece of it. So there are a couple of things I also thought about. We're not even half a verse in. We haven't even got to the man. We're just on the setting. This is a horrible place that Jesus goes in to minister to. I stopped and prayed for David Gottschitz and Juarez, ministering where the cartel, is ruling. I thought about Brian Moore in Germany, where, his church is strategically placed between a brothel and a homeless camp. All the other people that we support as missionaries that are in just the hardest places, and those people are in good company because that's how Jesus went about his work, going into these just impossible situations. And even Eagle Ranch, I think going into the hardest place, foster care, what you're doing, and, these are just painful situations, and you guys are on the front lines helping those people. Then I also thought about this guy. And, I don't want to push the story beyond what Mark is trying to tell us, but I think I have warrant for this observation. I asked myself, how's this guy surviving? How does a guy who is living amongst the tombs, he's probably naked based on the fact that later it says that one of the remarkable things about him was that he was wearing clothes. How does he survive? Like, how do you eat in this sort of thing? It says at the end that Jesus tells him to go and tell, and the ESV says, go and tell your friends. The NIV says, go and tell your family. And I think the family's probably closer, but it's that same old phrase we've encountered a couple of times, those who are to you, with you, around you. There are people who love this guy. And I just have to wonder, is his mama taking him food and leaving it out? Is his dad throwing a blanket out there? They've tried everything they can. They've bound him. They've shackled him. And they've just finally said it's best to just let him go and roam. But there are people that care about this guy. And I don't know, I just thought that was maybe humanizing as you read the story, because I think there's a sense that this guy can become a zombie in your mind as you think about it, that he's just existing independent of the rest of humanity in some self-sustaining way. He's obviously got people who care about him. And just it called to mind all of the people I think about that are just loving people faithfully, that just seem totally unresponsive to that love and who can't change them. You have family members, children, parents, whoever it is, brothers and sisters, that in some way, on some level, you wouldn't say they're demon possessed, but they just feel like that nothing will help them. You've tried everything and nothing will help them, and you're just left sort of giving them subsistence, what little you can from the outsides as they wander off into the tombs. It just was a very emotional sort of thought to me. What do you guys think about that?
There's a certain amount of even like hope in it. Because even if you put yourself in the position of this person's parents who were or were not bringing them to, somebody is, to your point, keeping them alive, you would have lost hope at some point in there. Like, I don't even know why they would bind him, but they're like, let's just maybe chain him to something and we can bring him food. And that doesn't even work. Like, you have to think they're kind of at their wits' end. And so there is a hope in any relationship that I have that feels hopeless, that feels like they're lost to the point that I'll never get back what it is I hope and desire out of them, a right mind, if you will. There's a certain amount of hope in that.
Yeah, and there's obviously this sort of negative rhythm that Mark has here. No one, nothing. No one could have, he's really emphasizing there's just nothing left to be done. So then we talk about this man. So he can't be shackled or chained. As we get into his interaction with Jesus, this is what we talked about. So Travis and Ben and I went to lunch on Tuesday, and I was like, hey, I have this reading of this text. I need somebody to help me think about it even before we get to Thursday. I think there is a way to read this that is what I said before, that this man is just a zombie. He's sort of catatonic. He's out of his mind. He's completely, and I think this is the result of like demon possession movies, where you just think that they're wholly unconscious, and the demon is totally in control. And I think this story makes a lot more sense if you see this man as aware on some level of his possession and unable to shake it, but fighting against it. So it says that he saw Jesus from afar and fell down before him. He ran to him and fell down before him. And I just don't think there's any reason that a demon, somebody wholly possessed by a demon, would do such a thing. I think this could be that this man has heard that there is a guy that heals people, and the man part of him, in somewhat control, rushes to come to Jesus and falls down before him. And then what happens next? I've just come to the point where I think the right answer is to say, I have no idea who is talking. And that I think that that's the point, is that this man is described as demon possessed, and that there is a human part of him, and there's a demonically possessed part of him, but that he is one whole person. He is man and demon. He is demon possessed man. And so when Jesus talks to him and he talks to Jesus, it bounces between the singular and the plural. And if you try to parse it out too closely of who's talking when and who's doing what, you just miss the whole thing. But you can't give everything here to the demons, and you can't say everything here belongs to the man either. He is this sort of, it's like both of these things are talking like two speakers. So it's like surround sound. Like out of this speaker comes the man, and out of this speaker comes the demon. And so let me read it back to you with that sort of in mind. And he cries with a loud voice, and he said, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." I think there's a left speaker, right speaker there. I think both of these things can be talking at the same time. He was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." So Jesus is talking to both of them. And Jesus asks him, "What is your name?" And he replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. I think what you could have here is you could have a man possessed by demons coming to Jesus, and the man wants to not be tormented with the demon, and the man doesn't want to be cast out of the country with the demons. I think what's happening here is what I think was happening in chapter 1 when Jesus encounters the man with the demon at the synagogue, is that the demon expects Jesus to destroy them and the man at the same time. So if you're going to kill me, you have to kill this man too. There is no instance in the Bible that I've found, think of, where a demon gets to kill somebody. They always don't have the power of life and death. All they can do is come in and try to destroy the image of God in that person and drive them to try to destroy themselves. So this man is cutting himself, he's crying out. I think that's part of his internal wrestling. So if you see this, this is the most difficult part of the text. If you see this as Jesus talking to this whole man, both demon and man, and the demon basically saying, if you destroy me, I'm taking him down with me. And if you cast him out, if you cast me out, you're casting him out too. And the man saying, don't torment us, don't kill me with them, and also don't cast us out either. Don't send me out of the country with these demons. And you sort of hear both of these things, left speaker, right speaker. I think it makes more sense, but that is very complicated. I look at Travis and I say, Travis, have I persuaded you of my position?
Yeah, I think so.
This is where I always look for assurance, Andy.
I haven't said no yet.
No, you haven't. I've been listening. I'm going to go no.
Okay.
I have always, with like very little to no study, I've always read it as if the whole response is from the demon.
Right.
That's like how I've read the English text the times that I've read this, is that all of these responses are from the demon, that the man, we don't have the man in his right mind speaking any sort of lucidity towards Jesus. It is just the demon sort of possessing and overtaking his mind, and they're doing all the talking. So where you see the don't torment me, that's the demons afraid of Jesus's power. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I think I would not want to parse it out. I want to mix them together.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So he says, by God, do not torment me. You would have to believe to understand what you're saying, and I think most people understand it exactly what you're saying, is that this demon came to Jesus, fell down at his feet, prostrate in a way that is almost every other time in the New Testament, like a sign of submission and worship,
right?
Swears, by God, don't torment me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God.
Jesus, Son of the Most High God is the most worrisome part of my argument.
Well,
I'm saying that.
In chapter 1, the demons, you sort of have the same thing. The demons seem to be aware. And this is where I want to mix the two together and say, like,
I don't
know.
Shudder? Doesn't James say they shudder?
Yeah. Like, I don't think it's either or. I think you can just say, like, a demon-possessed man who is both man and demon. Like, I don't think these are the demons just using his vocal cords. I think this is somebody in internal strife and turmoil that is like fighting these things, but he's still a single person in that sense. So I'm not saying that this is just the man talking or just the demons talking. It's like it's mixing them together in a way that Jesus can bounce between the singular and the plural, and the text can bounce between the singular and the plural. Because he asks him, Jesus talks to the singular sometimes, and then sometimes he talks to the plural. And he says, he says to him, he, singular, begged him, Jesus, to earnestly not send them, plural, out of the country. So that's why I think you have some warrant to say that, like, this is just a whole bag of mixed up, like, demon man, like, this is just an awful situation in some ways. Yeah, I know. It's hard to know. I don't really know.
And I'm not really disagreeing as much as I'm just sort of like, hey, this is how I've read it
literally
in the past.
Ironically playing devil's advocate.
I feel okay about your interpretation.
Well, let me go to the next piece and tell you why I think that sort of works out here. I think the demons do this. They want Jesus to, if they're going to be destroyed, they're going to take somebody in the image of God down with them. And they don't expect Jesus to have mercy on this person. So Jesus is actually going to pull them apart. He was saying to the man, come out of him, you unclean spirit. So Jesus is pulling them apart. And I think the demons are saying, no, you have to deal with us together. And we want you to, if you're going to destroy us, you have to destroy the image of God with us. And that's why they possess human beings. They want to destroy the image of God. So Jesus is going to pull them apart, and then they want to go into the pigs. And Jesus lets them, right? He says, you can go into these pigs. And it seems strange to us. Why would Jesus do that? Like, what is the purpose of this thing? Why doesn't he just cast them into hell immediately, right then and there? And I think it's because Jesus wants, he wants everybody, including the man, to see what those demons were about, right? They were not able to destroy the man because they can't seemingly sort of have the power of life and death over men, but they immediately kill these pigs. They drive them into the sea and drown them. And I think Jesus lets them do this as a lesson on what this man has been saved from. This is what these things were trying to do, bring death on this person. And while they weren't able to do it to the man, this is what they would have done. They immediately drowned the pigs in the sea. So I think it's a lesson to everybody about what his mercy has looked like and what he's been saved from. What do you think about that?
I'll agree to that. Yeah.
All right. So then the herdsmen go and they tell everybody what's happened. And the classic interpretation of this is the people come out and they don't like it because they've lost all their pigs and they've lost all their money and they want Jesus to leave because he's cost them shepherding money. I don't guess you shepherd pigs. What do you do with pigs? Herd them? I guess you've heard them. Herdsmen.
Eat them.
That's fake.
But it doesn't say they're angry. It doesn't say that they're angry. It says they're afraid. And so my question to you would be, what are these people afraid of? They see the man sitting in his right mind. They hear the story about the pigs and the man. What is it that you think has caused fear in their hearts?
I mean, could it be a kind of a polytheistic? We just talked about the strong man being bound, but could this be, while this guy was clearly demon possessed and another deity was stronger and just helped him out? And so if we cast this guy out and tried to chain him, and now this stronger God has done something good for him, well, he might turn around and do something bad to us.
Could be. It could be. I had not considered sort of a pagan understanding of it from like that standpoint.
Because they are a Roman, like you mentioned at the front end, like it is a Roman province, so they're gonna be most
they're worshiping something.
Yeah.
They think something is powerful.
I always thought it was just kind of an economic. They were afraid that this guy just cost them their livelihood. So of course they wanted to believe.
I laugh. I have laughed at this, like thinking about the herdsmen who like go to the master and are like, you wouldn't believe it. We're just hanging out on the cliff, doing everything right. And then they got like demons came and they ran off the cliff. And the master was like, yeah, right. I've heard this story before. Like you left the gate open.
All of them? They all drowned?
Those whole 2,000.
Thousands of them are in the water.
I just love the idea of them going to tell the master the story. Like, oh gosh, I don't think he's gonna buy
Hawaiian-style
it.
barbecue. So the reason I think that it's more than just an economic argument is the text relates it to the demon-possessed man. Something has happened relative to him, not just the loss of the pigs and the death of the pigs. And they told them what happened to both of them. So they're clearly they clearly know something happened. I think it is probably twofold. One is that they are frightened by the idea that the supernatural is actually happening in their midst. And even if it is a sort of challenge to the pagan gods, at least the pagan gods didn't bother them. They weren't doing anything. And so these people are experiencing a power like they've never seen before, they've never heard of before. It's evident to them right in their midst before their eyes. There's 2,000 pigs in the sea, and the crazy man is sitting there clothed and sane, and it frightens them.
Yeah, there's a fine line between awe and fear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so they're frightened that the supernatural is actually happening before them. And instead of reckoning with it or worshiping Jesus or asking questions, they would just prefer it be out of sight, out of mind. And we want to go back to the world the way we understood how it worked. And we don't like the fact that this guy's disturbing our life and that we're having to reckon with this power. And so we just want normalcy. Like, go away, don't come back.
What is it that both of the last two stories end with fear?
Yes. So the disciples are afraid because the power has broken in some way. You know, they're at least in fearful and awe, I think, but it's still fear, right? It's the same word. And these people are afraid for a lot of the same reason. But the disciples don't leave him, right? They stay with him. It's a good call out.
And a lot of those connections about the fear in both passages. Yeah, they ask of chapter 4, who is this? And the man answers the question in verse 7. Now, granted, the demon in the synagogue in chapter 1 says something similar, but he says that Jesus is the Son of the Most High God.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I think sort of going back to what Travis was talking about as well, you know, that man is publicly making this declaration about Jesus' identity. Mm-hmm. And I do think that has implications for the people there. You know, is he safe? You know, like the whole Aslan question, is he good? But it's interesting that question is somewhat answered here on the heels of that previous passage.
That's a great point about, is he safe? They're not denying his power or what happened. They just think this is not safe for us.
All three parties are confronted with the power of Jesus, and they all beg for something.
Yeah.
So the demons essentially beg for mercy, because they know how powerful Jesus is and they're afraid of it. The crowds see how powerful Jesus is and they beg him to leave, so they just don't want to deal with it. And then the man that was saved from the demons sees the power and he begs that he can stay with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so he's not afraid of it. He doesn't want to bury it. He wants to proclaim it.
Yeah.
So that's probably where we are. So when we know what we've been saved from, like that power should drive us out to others.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something about fear here too, that kind of like what you said, there's a fine line between fear and awe. There's a good fear, right? That, we fear the Lord, and that the fact that they're trying to just push him away, like if you just leave, then we won't have to deal with you. I think that is reflective of our hearts, where it's like there are places we push the Lord out of and say like, I don't want to deal with you here. I don't want to talk about this sin. I don't want to do that thing, these hard things. But, we would look at them and say that's foolishness to think that you can just have places that the Lord can't go or won't be. And yet we do it all the time in our hearts, driving him out because we're just scared of what would happen if he comes.
I saw this interview with a comedian, and he was reading the Bible kind of for the first time, and he got to John chapter 5, and when Jesus heals the blind man. But first he asks, do you want to be healed? And this comedian was like, that's a great question, because sometimes I'm asking myself, like, if Jesus heals me, I have to leave all this stuff behind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they probably think that too, like the implications of a Jewish Messiah.
No more
beyond what we are ready to reckon with.
I mean, it to me, like, we talked earlier, Stephen, about people cared for him and fed him. Sure, there was other people in that area that knew this guy and cared about him before he became possessed. And you would think that seeing he got his life back would be a great sign of hope. Like, there's other people in the area that need help. Yeah. And yet, despite that, they still want him to go.
Yeah. Jesus gets back in the boat. He goes back to the other side of the sea. Before he does, the guy tries to get in the boat with him. He says, I want to come with you, which is, of course, what your response would be, right? I love you. I want to follow you. And Jesus tells him no. So he does not permit the man to go with him after he has just permitted the demons to go into the pigs, which I just think is an interesting sort of word contrast. Jesus says, no, go home and tell your friends how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. I just think mercy is a very interesting word there. It doesn't say like how he has rescued you, how he has healed you. It says he has mercy on you. And I think our typical definition of mercy, right, which is something you don't deserve, is that you look at this guy and say, well, is this really mercy? Yes, he did not have to pull this man out of this, which I think is part of what the demon sort of angle here is, right? Which is, this guy's a sinner. Why would you not destroy him with us? We are evil, sure, but have you met these people? All these wicked sinners. And yet the Lord has mercy on him, pulls these demons out of him, restores his sanity and life. And I just think that's a beautiful picture, that the Lord doesn't owe us anything. He did not owe this man healing, and he gives it to him anyway, knowing full and well that it's going to cost him his own blood and life to effectuate that.
I think another beautiful thing about it, when he says you're the Son of God, the Most High, I mean, I think you could probably make a claim that that's coming from the demons, but it's interesting when he says, go tell how the Lord has had mercy for you. Mark says he went and talked about what Jesus had done. And so despite any kind of demonic influence and recognizes his identity at the initial encounter, he clearly is making some kind of strong connection about Jesus' identity. I'm not saying he has a Nicene Creed understanding of Jesus, but he's clearly making some significant connections there.
This is another one of the instances of Jesus making these very direct claims for himself. Jesus did this, and he says, the Lord has done this for you, right? And then the guy switches it back, like you said, and it just this constant, Jesus is setting himself up as the Lord, and these people are also attributing it to him.
Yeah, and the Lord in Mark, chapter 1 is the Lord from Isaiah, prepare the way of the Lord, Yahweh. And so it just reminds us of that initial introduction of Jesus as the God of the Old Testament.
This guy, too, he had to have some initial disappointment, I'm sure. He wanted to go with Jesus. He wanted to be the 13th disciple, probably. And who knows why Jesus tells him no. I mean, ultimately, we see there's a good purpose, that these people marvel at what has happened. But this guy's ministry, sort of the application that I've made of this, is just to exist as one healed by Jesus. I mean, he's going proclaiming, but his proclamation is basically just to live a life that points back to Jesus and say, like, I was once bound and now I'm free. And Jesus did that. And I think that is should be encouraging for lots of people, that a faithful life just testifies to the Lord's change in you, and that some people's ministry is not going to be a missionary or going to be a pastor or going to be a seminary, that the greatest thing you can do is just live faithfully after the Lord has changed your heart, and that's a wonderful testimony to the world about who Christ is.
Well, don't even the disciples, or maybe it's John, I'm thinking it's John at the end of his book, like talk about part of the witness of Jesus, and part of like what makes this credible is there's these people all over the area who are telling you stories of having interacted with Jesus. I think it's John who says like, and these are just a few of the many other people. So this guy existed in real life, in real time, at a real place. And so as Christianity begins to kind of form, he's like, yeah, no, I knew him actually. Like I used to be in the, like over there in the tombs. Like, you were in the tombs? Like, yeah, you didn't know? I had a legion and they went in the pigs, and he's like telling this story all the time, everywhere he goes. And so it's this picture that Jesus leaves these little pockets, almost like he starts to plant churches throughout his world, and they begin to proclaim the gospel.
I'm not going to believe this.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Lazarus in John 11, right? One of the reasons that people are coming to believe in Jesus is just because Lazarus is alive. Yeah. Anything but living. And then the Pharisees try to kill him, ironically, because of that. So I was just curious, ministry, and you guys are all doing ministry in different forms and ways. I think we've all had places where we're like, I want to do ministry like that. I want to do that thing in that way. And then the Lord just says no, right? And you go to go do something else. How have you handled disappointments like that? And how have you pressed on?
Sometimes for me, it's going back to the calling that got me to the place I am right now, right? So, okay, I'm looking at this thing that I want to go do. There were times when I was working in the church and thought, I'm going to go work over at this church, and I would put in an application and think they're going to hire me and this is going to be really wonderful. Then the door would shut and I would kind of go like, well, I guess God has me here, which was like one time I was really excited about this role and what this was going to be. And like knowing that God, that God uses very ordinary means to sort of put us in places. We have a question on an application to work at Eagle Ranch, and it's like, why do you want to work here? And a lot of people will say like, God, I feel like God's calling me to this. And I sometimes tongue in cheek say like, we're not called until we call you. Like you don't actually work here until we offer you a job. And like you can feel called, but until somebody calls you to work at a place, you're called to be in the place you're at. And so I had to kind of remember my original calling at times where I've felt like, oh, this next thing is the thing for me.
It's such a funny point. The language of calling gets thrown around in such strange ways. Because I've had the same experience where it's like, why do you feel called to this work? And it's like, well, if I say yes, does that mean that like you can't disagree with me and the Holy Spirit? Or how does that work?
Right.
So you're right. Just being faithful where the Lord has placed you. He placed this guy in the Decapolis to be a preacher of his grace by living his life there. And this guy's first expectations are disappointed, but people marveled at, how the Lord had used him.
But that's typically not my first response, by the way. And like my first disappointment is like anger, and I go home and I'm like, and I,
what if I got
I him and haw a little bit, and then woe is me. I do the first like insecurity, woe is me, and then I go back to my calling, just to be clear.
Yeah, so I think I told this story last week maybe, but I did a church planners assessment in seminary, thinking like maybe this is what I'm going to be called to, and they told me like I shouldn't even say the words church planning, let alone do church planning. And so that's what kind of got me down the road of looking into youth ministry. Yeah. So had that gone different, had they said, yeah, Travis, we think you should plant a church, I wouldn't be in Chestnut Mountain. I never would have known Chestnut Mountain existed.
Yeah. And I think you could apply this not just into ministry too. You take this and extrapolate it into normal people's lives, right? There are lots of jobs I haven't gotten that I've applied for, and I've worked real hard to try to get and got told no.
I see this the most working with precious little hearts of middle schoolers and high schoolers when they have their first girlfriend or they ask a girl to be their girlfriend and they either get dumped or rejected. And I'm like, one day you're going to look back on this and when you meet your wife and you're going to be like, this was actually a good thing. Yeah. And I'm just now kind of starting to see that first group that, did get dumped meet their wife. Yeah. And it's so much fun to see.
It's wonderful. All right. Well, Andy, talk to us about your Sunday evening devotion. What's the text? Read it for us. Tell us your thoughts.
I will. So my Sunday evening is Daniel chapter 4, verse Let me make sure I get the verses right. 34 and 35. And I'll read it. It's about Nebuchadnezzar. And it says this: at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Really interesting passage. One of the things that I found interesting, I like went and looked, because I started to think like, this is Nebuchadnezzar in the first person. And a commentary somewhere that I read said this is the only time a pagan speaks like this in Scripture. I don't know if that was true. I tried to argue with it in my mind.
The only one I can think of is Cyrus, maybe. Sending the people back.
Ben's thinking,
Yeah,
hold
but
on.
so he definitely says, do this for Yahweh, but like, I don't think Cyrus makes those kind of statements.
Yeah,
though.
not like this, right? Yeah.
It's just really interesting because if you look at Nebuchadnezzar, the other thing that's interesting about Nebuchadnezzar, he shows up all throughout the Old Testament. So you see him in Kings as he like interacts with, he's part of this exile. He shows up in some of the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Like
He looms.
He has a prominent role throughout, but Daniel gives us like the most picture of what his life was like and what his kingdom was like. So you get, if you read Daniel 1-4, which I would encourage you to do, it's kind of an interesting read. You see sort of the ups and downs of this guy. He has these like really high moments of honoring God and these really low moments of honoring himself. And he has this exaltation and this humiliation. It's an interesting up and down, where the story that you're sharing in the morning is just like this one point in time of this one guy has this issue, is healed. It still expresses God's power, but Nebuchadnezzar sort of goes back and forth because in the fiery furnace, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story where they go in the fiery furnace, he actually does declare God is the God. He makes this grand declaration. If anybody ever worships another god, like they should be thrown in the fiery furnace. And then he does that, gets humiliated, eats grass. His hair becomes like the feathers of eagles, which is a great line in the Bible.
You start telling the youth kids that your hair is the feathers of eagles.
The dew rests on it from grass. Like it's just a really bizarre humiliation. And then we pick it up here, kind of near the end of his life, and him saying again, like, God is over and above all things. It's really interesting.
I've always wondered about it, Nebuchadnezzar, for the same reasons that you're talking about. So he seems to be able to acknowledge this higher power, almost on like a demon level, like Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Because what he doesn't say is, hey, let's all get circumcised and go to the temple and keep kosher and let's get a copy of the law in here. He just seems to be on this like there seems to be a level where you can acknowledge Yahweh as like the supreme being of the world and still not call him Father,
Yeah, and one of the places that I don't have an outline yet, and so I'm thinking it out loud here with you guys. But one of the places that I find really interesting is Nebuchadnezzar has significant power. And so one of the challenges that he bumps up against often is his own power and his own. And so it's like to give God all the power and then to worship him and then to submit to him is to lay down what is at the time the greatest kingdom in the world. He's the most powerful man in the world. And you got to believe he's got people around him saying, you're the most powerful man in the world. You can do whatever you want, whatever it is. Like when he calls all these people, they come. And if they don't do what he wants, he's like ready to kill them. So he's just a really interesting character in these places that maybe I resonate with Nebuchadnezzar. One is he gets himself in this trouble. Like his sin gets him to his humiliation in the same way that our sin gets us to our own humiliation. And it's only when God rescues him and he sort of submits to God's power that he begins to see what it is that God's doing in his life. And the only other thing I think is interesting, I love you guys' perspective, is this idea that like the demon-possessed man we don't know why he's demon-possessed. I'm sort of curious. Is like Nebuchadnezzar, we can see why God humiliates him, because he's like, hey, he looks out and he goes, I'm the best.
Yeah.
He like sings a little song. It's actually really fun. You need to look it up in Daniel 4. I can't find it right now, but he's kind of like, after a year, he goes like, it says he looks out and he's like, I am really great. And then he gets humiliated. I guess this awesome moment where he's like, look at what I've made. And then God's like, boom, that was the moment. But we don't get that from the demon-possessed man. Like, what was the parallel? Like, as you were putting these two together, like, what's the parallel for you that you hope people see in these two passages?
The restoration of his mind, and that, like, the Lord's power over our thoughts. It does not stop at our skin. Like, he penetrates all the way to our hearts and minds. And I think it's fear evoking that, the Lord could drive you by his hand to eat grass out in the field. But at the same time, wonderfully helpful to think there's nobody that he can't heal. His mind could just be restored to him instantly. I think it's probably about, that a pagan, just what you said, you have a Gentile guy sort of coming to sanity, and here you have a pagan king acknowledging God Most High. But, I don't know. I think that you make a lot of good points here about what is going on with Nebuchadnezzar. And maybe that's asking more than what we're supposed to ask of it. But I just, it's convicting to kind of have this conversation and think about the number of people that I know who I think they believe in God, and they believe in the Christian God. And they probably believe Jesus Christ exists and is alive and rose from the dead, and love their sin and have this irrational sort of being bound in chains to their sin in a way that looks from the outside in like, is that it's not demon possession in the way that we would say it, but it's like that person is just so close on that spectrum to being given over to this thing that you can have this intellectual assent that has just nothing to do with your heart.
Yeah. And it can be an intellectual assent. It can be physical possessions. Yeah. It can be embedded sin in your life. Like, there are these things, to your point, there's these people that, are close. Yeah. And yet that power, there's something that holds power over them. In Nebuchadnezzar's world, it really was power. It really was a kingdom. But we can build a kingdom in all kinds of things. We can make lots of things an idol. And when it is, and it holds to a point, we can't break free outside of God's work in our life.
Yeah, you asked a good question about why is this man demon possessed. I thought the same thing too, and we aren't told. So it's just, did he sin? Did he invite it? Was he living? Well, you just don't know. That he just a normal guy, and it just happened to him one day. We don't know these things. And I also wonder too what you guys think about this. On the spectrum of like demon possession to just like giving yourself wholly over to sin, is that a spectrum? Is there really a material philosophical difference between giving into temptation over and over and over again that the Satan puts before you and, this guy's being wholly possessed by a demon? I think they're different things, but I'm not so sure that they're not like related to each other in a way. That I can look at this guy as an example of somebody just bound to sin they cannot get rid of.
I think there is a spectrum. Yeah. I agree. I'm reminded of Ephesians 2, where Paul talks about, prior to becoming a believer, that all people, he includes himself, we follow the ways of the world, we follow the cravings of our sinful nature, and we also follow the spirit of the air who is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived. So, like, we may not go around cutting ourselves and being chained up, but, like, there is a sense in which there's internal satanic power on the non-believer.
That's a great point.
And the sad thing is we don't recognize it. This guy's obvious, but, like, we're just going about following the world and our desires, and it's the old adage of Satan, flesh, and the world are three enemies. Yeah. And it's scary to think about that. Not even realize that.
I just look at this guy and I think I'm just not that far from that. Like, I could see myself just being irrational, and I know so many people that I feel like are like that. But I just don't think it's as black and white as we would like it to be, because it's fearful to us to think that we're also dealing with these kind of demonic powers, and we're giving ourselves to sin and temptation. Well, it's been a long episode. If you've made it to the end of this one, you are a trooper. But this was great conversation, so I think it's worth every minute of it. Well, thank you again for joining us. We'll continue studying the Bible, walking through the scriptures, and asking ourselves each week, so what about us?
Thank you for joining us on this episode of So What About Us? If this show helped you connect the dots between Sunday and the rest of your week, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'd also love to know how you're applying this in your own life. Send us an email at podcast@cmpca.org and let us know. Until next week, remember that Scripture isn't just asking, what about them? It's asking, what about us?